Welcome back everyone, my name is Mo and thank you for visiting our channel Sweet Camper Life. So as we travel the state and camp and check things out, one of the things people love to do while they're camping is fishing. Well, I do that for a living, so obviously I focus on that, and I always pay attention to the equipment that they're using and how they're using it. And I can tell you, by and large, there's lots of room for improvement. So stick around and I'll share some of my ideas with you. So where we're camping, we always have limited space pretty much. So when it comes to rods and fishing, that's really an afterthought, right? That's something that we do while we're camping. It's not our primary purpose usually. So that's always kind of a second thought, is our fishing equipment. Well, so I'll touch on that some, and I'll start with the different types of rods. There's really two different types of rods, right? The first type of rod is going to be a one-piece rod, and that's a rod that's just one solid blank, and that's all it is. The good thing is that type of rod is much more durable. You can apply more pressure to a fish. It overall performs better, but the drawback to that is that they're long. So they're anywhere between 6 feet to 7 feet to 9 feet, depending on the type of fishing you're going to do, and that takes up a lot of room. There's not usually a lot of places in a camper where you can put a 7 or 8 foot rod and store it there without getting damaged or taking up room. So the other option to that is a two-piece rod. So here's an example of a two-piece rod, and it's exactly what that means. You just basically put this rod together and then you're ready to go fishing. And the good thing about it is that you basically have a 7 foot rod that really takes up half the space. So this is a great option, and there's drawbacks to that too. So a two-piece rod usually won't perform as better, and you have to be careful because they have a tendency of breaking where the two pieces meet. It's called the ferrule. So right where they meet, they have a tendency of breaking if you apply too much pressure or the wrong kind of pressure. But it's very convenient. They're usually less expensive, and it gives you the option of packing 2, 3, 4 rods for the entire family in a very small space. So out of the two, I would recommend, if you don't have a lot of room, to go with a two-piece rod. So really, regardless of the type of rod that you're going to use, one of the things that I do notice is that people tend to use bigger rods than what they really need for the type of fishing they're doing. Now, generally speaking, when you're camping, at least in Florida, there's going to be lakes is a big portion of the bodies of water that the campgrounds are around, and you also have some beach fishing, some saltwater fishing. But I will tell you, with the exception of fishing from piers or maybe jetties that are right on a inlet with a lot of current, there you would need heavier tackle. Most all your fishing needs will be covered with a rod, reel, and line that is in the between 8-pound and 15-pound range. That's really all we need. But I've seen people fishing in a lake for bass, and they're using 20 and 30-pound tackle, stuff that is really meant for ocean fishing, so it's overkill. And if you do hook something and you land a fish, you're really not going to enjoy it if you're fishing with gear that is so heavy. So when I say 8 to 15-pound test, we need to talk about the different types of line. And there's generally two types of line. The line that's been the most in use for decades and decades is monofilament line, which is basically plastic. And these are very cheap. You can buy these anywhere, and these are going to be maybe $5, $6, $7 a spool, and you have a lot of line in here. And the other type of line, the one that I personally use for my charters and clients, is braided line. There's a huge difference between the two. So when we talk about monofilament, it's going to be easier to work with, but it is definitely much thicker. It's more prone to breaking because it is basically a nylon. So if there's a nick or something bites it, or you get some kind of damage to the line on a dock or pier, it tends to break a lot easier. And also, if you're casting far away and you hook a big fish and he's running, this really acts like a rubber band, so you have a lot of play in this line. I haven't been using that type of line in probably 12 years. The other type of line, the braided line, this is more expensive. It's a little bit harder to work with, but this is much, much thinner, much more sensitive, and you can apply more pressure on a fish with a smaller diameter line. It lasts a lot longer, and it's definitely more resistant to nicks and scrapes and cuts and stuff like that. I have had clients land fish where a part of the line was broken and it was starting to unravel, and yet we were still able to land it because the braided line is exactly that. It's filaments of Kevlar and other materials where they just braid it together in a special machine. So it's basically like tiny, tiny rope, much more durable. So when we talk about the difference between braid and mono, we also need to consider capacity. So when you're using monofilament line, you're going to need a little bit larger reel, because since the line is thicker, you're going to need more capacity. So if you want to put 200 yards of monofilament line on a reel, you're going to need a little bit bigger reel. But if you're going to put 200 yards of braided line on your reel, you can go with a lot smaller reel. Since it is so much thinner, you can pack a lot more line in there. One of the other things I notice when people are fishing in a campground with a lake or a river or something like that is that they tend to use terminal tackle, a lot of terminal tackle. And terminal tackle is just any of the stuff that you use to connect your line to your hook. So some of the more common examples are going to be barrel swivels, cable, wire, and snap swivels. So these are all different types of gear that you would use to attach your hook to your fishing line. But I absolutely detest it. I do not ever use any of that in my fishing gear when I'm fishing with clients. Now, I will tell you, I never fish when I'm camping because that's what I do for a living. So when I'm camping, I want to stay away from what I do for a living, and I want to do something different. But I can't help but notice what other people are doing, and I stay quiet. I feel like sometimes I should tell them something, but it's really their business. They're just there to relax, not necessarily set a world record or something like that. But here are some alternatives to using terminal tackle. Terminal tackle is going to make your bait or lure look completely unnatural. It's going to weigh everything down, and it's basically going to spook the fish. The fish can see that unless you're fishing in really dirty water, kind of murky water like that. None of that stuff is good news. So here are some knots that you can use in place of all this terminal tackle. It's going to make it much easier for you to use, definitely more effective, and it's going to make a big difference in your presentation of your bait or lure to the fish. So some of the knots that I use, and I absolutely swear by them, are going to be first my double line. So when you have your main fishing line coming from your rod, I always double it up, and now my leader has twice as much surface area to bite, if you will, and clinch to that leader. The braided line, if you're going to be using braided line, is so thin. You have to be very careful and tie really good knots. So doubling your line is a great way to make that happen, and it gives you a little bit of protection as well, because I've had clients land a nice fish where one of the strands of the double line was broken, but we were able to land that fish because we had two sets of line there, and then one broke and the other one stayed intact, and we were able to land that fish. So I always use the Bimini twist. That's a great knot, but I will tell you, it is difficult to tie. I'm going to put down in the description links to all these knots. So if you want to try to learn the Bimini knot, absolutely go for it. I would recommend using the spider hitch. That's a much easier knot to tie. It's effective. It's not as good as the Bimini twist, but I suspect most of the stuff that we're going to catch from shore isn't going to really test our tackle that much. The second knot that I use, and now this is connecting my line, including my double line, to my leader. Now it's important to understand what a leader is. When you're fishing braided line really has some kind of coloration. It's like tiny rope. So fish tend to see that, they tend to shy away from that. So one of the things that I always do is I use the lightest leader possible. And leader is just basically monofilament, but it is a different material. This is called fluorocarbon. So it's a little bit more expensive, so you're only going to use it from your line to your hook connection. So basically about 18 to 24 inches or so. But this fluorocarbon material disappears in the water, so it makes your presentation a lot better. It's also much more resistant to nicks and scrapes and cuts, so you tend to land fish more often if you're using your fluorocarbon material. And like I said, it's a little bit more expensive, definitely well worth it. You don't want to tie your hook directly to the braided line. That's not going to make any sense. The fish is going to see it. It's going to make it tough to get some bites. So the knot that I use from my line to my leader is called the surgeon's knot. Again, this one's very easy to tie, and I'll put a link in the description below that instruction how to tie the surgeon's knot, but it's really easy. And then finally, from my leader to my hook, I use a simple clinch knot, just a clinch knot. And that basically, you just put the line through the loop of the hook, which is called the eye of the hook, and then you twist the hook 5, 6, 7 times, and then you put your tag in, which is the little piece that's left from your line, back in through that loop. You tighten it, make sure it's really nice and tight, won't slip, trim off the end, and you're set. So those are 3 knots that are absolutely crucial. I use on a daily basis, and they are very strong knots, and that helps you get away from all the terminal tackle, from the swivels and the cables and the snap swivels and all this mess that usually works against us, not in our favor. Now, regardless of how much you spend on a rod and reel, and believe me, there is all kinds of money you can spend. This, for example, is a Quantum Accurist. This is a size 30. This is really the workhorse on my fishing charter. So I would say I probably have clients using this reel 80% of the time. And here are some examples of fish that clients have caught recently on this reel and line. Now I have 15-pound braided line, and I'm using anywhere between 30 to 40-pound fluorocarbon leader on this. But it just gives you an idea that you can catch these kinds of fish on these little reels, okay? But we have to take care of them regardless. This retails for about $100 or so, this Quantum Accurist, and I'll put the link in the description below as well. And it's solid. I've gotten 1.5 years out of it, which is a lot, because my tackle gets beat up. Clients kick it and they drop it, and it gets full of salt and gets used a lot. But you may not want to spend $100 on a reel. You may want to spend $30 or $50. When it comes to fishing reels, I will tell you, you generally get what you pay for. But if you're fishing in freshwater, it's not going to get the abuse from the harsh elements like salt water. So you can afford to go a little cheaper if you want, or you can invest in something nice like this, and then you can use it both in salt and fresh. But either way, here are some simple tips on how to take care of your tackle, whether it's your reel, whether it's your rod, to make sure that they work properly, they last a long time, and you don't hook the fish of a lifetime and end up losing it because you haven't taken care of your equipment. So a common mistake my clients make, and I see people make fishing in general, when they're hooking and they're fighting a fish, is what's called high sticking. And high sticking is when the rod is bent and you have that rod way too high up, almost straight up, and then the tip of the rod is bent down. That's high sticking, and the problem is a lot of times your rod will break right there where you have that extreme amount of pressure and stress on that rod. So you don't want to do that. So when you're fighting a fish, you want to keep generally the rod about this angle and not any higher, because you're trying to use the action of the rod in combination with the reel in order to fight that fish. So no high sticking, keep it at a flatter angle and fight your fish and enjoy that fight. Another way you can take care of your fishing equipment while you're camping is basically to lube it. You want to keep everything lubricated. Now it really depends if you're freshwater fishing or saltwater fishing. If you're freshwater fishing, it's not getting the corrosive spray and salt water on here, so you can basically use it and then store it and you're fine. However, if you're using your tackle, your rods and reels, and fishing in salt water, you definitely want to rinse it with fresh water when you're done. So I tend to be a stickler for maintaining my equipment. So what I do is I just keep it standing up like that in a corner where it won't get scratched, and I'll just get a hose and rinse it off, and I'm done. In my case, I keep all my rods in the boat, so I rinse them all off with the hose right there where they're at, and I'm done. You would want to do the same thing. You get back from fishing and you're back at your camper and you were in a saltwater canal or the beach or a pier or anywhere else. If there was salt water, you want to make sure you rinse it all off with fresh water, make sure it's nice and clean, and get all that nasty salt off, because it will corrode everything and you will notice over time. And the other thing that you can do that's very simple is that you can take a lubricant, it's like a silicone spray or something like that. I would stay away from lubricants that have petroleum in it, because it will definitely damage the monofilament line if you're using it, and it will also get into your braid. So avoid stuff like WD-40 and anything that has those kinds of oils and petroleum-based products. But there's a bunch of different products out on the market, like Salt X, for example, where you can use those to spray off your reels. You can also use silicone spray, and you basically just spray it and then wipe it down, and then you're all set. And so the last tip that I give you as far as your rod and reel maintenance is your drag system. So every reel, these are all spinning reels, and so these reels have a drag system, and there's a little knob here, and you can adjust the amount of tension on this spool. And this is what's called a drag. It's like a braking system, and when a fish takes off and starts swimming away, they have to swim against the preset tension that you have put here. And this is basically a series of washers that are just kind of clamped down together the more you tighten it. So when you're done fishing, what I always do is I always back off the drag to make sure it's nice and loose, and those washers don't stay compressed all the time. So what that means is you go camping this month, February, and you caught a couple fish, you pressed on the drag and all that. If you don't release that drag, when you go camping again, maybe in March or maybe in April, or whenever you go camping again, and you try to use that reel, chances are those washers have been compressed so much that now you can't release line. So if you hook a big fish, the fish takes off, the reel doesn't respond, and he breaks off, and you just lost a trophy fish. So those are some simple tips on how to take care of your fishing tackle. So I have a lot more tips that I can share with you guys. If you guys want me to do a video on what baits and lures to use and techniques to use in saltwater if you're in Florida, and maybe they can apply somewhere else if you're camping in Texas or Carolinas or whatever, or you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for joining our channel, and you have a great day.